But what I want to do now is show you the information the textbook gives you in action. I'm going to show you how I have conducted a search through the library databases and Google Scholar to find a scholarly source that I could use for a paper that I could write, as you will be doing. So we'll take a look here at the library databases first.
So when you're on the Santa Fe website, you just want to scroll down a little bit here and you'll see the library icon. Click here and we can search the library catalog. You can look for all kinds of stuff here, but what we want to do today is go to the databases.
We have access to 94 databases, and those databases are special search engines that give us access to probably thousands of different journals, newspapers, magazines, different resources. And so you can use these databases to find non-scholarly sources as well, which I'll show you in a later video. But our goal right now is to make use of them to find scholarly sources because you need that scholarly source for your paper. So there are a lot of different options here. You can experiment. To the side, you can see the databases that the library recommends for, pretty much everybody. I would say Academic Search Complete. I'm going to show you that one is a great starting place for any project. And it is going to give you access to sources that deal with a lot of different topics, a lot of different disciplines. But if you want to look at a database that is focused on a particular area of study, you can filter by subject, and you can see that we have individual disciplines like English and literature, like health and medicine, and you can see databases that are good for those in particular. So health and wellness, Medline. Once again, you see Academic Search Complete is mentioned because it is kind of the Google of library databases. It'll give you access to lots of stuff. But we also have more focused databases that you're welcome to check out depending upon your topic. And one thing that is always a good bet is to say, I'm going to start with this database. But if I can't find what I'm looking for, I will try another database because it will point you to different articles, different journals, and it's important not to give up at the first sign of difficulty. I encourage you, email me if you're having trouble finding sources. What I probably will do is recommend another database or another method for you. And this is something that I also want you to grow accustomed to doing on your own as well too, because that's going to be a big part of any kind of college writing that you're doing. So let's take a look at Academic Search Complete and see what we can find. It opens up here. All right, so a lot of the databases are going to have the same kind of structure, and you have various search fields, you have things you can customize, and we're going to play with a few of these to see what difference it makes in our searches. I want you to go to search options right away, and you will see that you can limit your results to scholarly peer-reviewed journals. So we want to click that box right away, right? Now, when I'm searching for my other source later, I can decide not to click that. And I can even specify that I want a newspaper article or a periodical, a magazine article. So I can still use this search engine for my second source if I want to. But right now I only want scholarly sources. Now, I'm not really worried about any of these other things right now. I am just going to look at the search fields. So you read about key terms in chapter 48 and different ways to customize your search, because sometimes just typing in one phrase will either get you stuff that's unrelated to your topic, give you way too many sources to look through. So we do want to experiment. Once again, if something doesn't work the way you hoped it would the first time, try again. Switch your terms around a little bit before you even move to another database. So what I'm going to do first, my topic is ethics in video games, the idea that video games can help us practice ethics, can teach us ethics. And so I am going to simply type in video game Oh, look, so it'll suggest topics for me, which is handy, but none of these are quite what I am interested in. So I'm going to go ahead and type video game ethics and see what happens. I have not customized anything else here yet. So I'm going to hit search, and I only have 2 sources, and one of them I can't read. All right, so one source here. Now it does look potentially useful to me. EPIC, a framework for using video games in ethics education. So I might want to check that out, but we are definitely going to have to customize my search more because I know there's more sources out there. But first, let me take a look at this and see, if it might indeed be useful to me as a scholarly source. So it comes from the Journal of Moral Education. It's still relatively recent, and you can see the subject terms it relates to. Remember this, subject terms we might use in our searches to bring us up, more specialized results. So ethics education, video games and education, those are terms that might be useful to me. Authors, when they publish their articles, often supply keywords that they believe relate to their article. I've had to do that when I've published. And so it's a good way to think about, as a writer, what am I engaging with? What kind of readers do I want to read my article? But it also helps me as a researcher. Okay, I could add ethical thinking to my search. I could add moral instead of ethical to part of my search and see what kind of sources I come up with. Now, I know this is an academic source because I've got an abstract. Not all scholarly sources have abstracts, but many of them do. And those serve a purpose in 2 ways. One, it tells us this is most likely a scholarly source. We also know that it is because the library has filtered it for us, so we can trust that this is indeed scholarly. But it also gives me a summary of the article so I can find out if this is even worth my time to consider for my paper before I commit to reading it. So as I look through this, it actually seems a bit more technical than what I'm looking for. It's talking about a particular program for developing ethical video games, and that's beyond my purview. I don't want to get that technical. Now, there might be parts of it that are still useful to me, so maybe I download it and I look through it. In order to download it, let's see. Well, I can actually read it in HTML, but if I want to make sure I can look at it later, if I go to the side here, I can print it out, I can save it, I can even have a citation already generated for me. I can find a permanent link to this article. The easiest thing, what I normally do, is I hit save, and then I'm going to download a PDF, or in this case, it looks like an HTML version. So details here, I don't want to work. Actually, over here, PDF full text. I don't want HTML full text. That doesn't always show up well on your desktop. So PDF full text, and then I can save it for later. I click save it to my computer, and then I can read it. So I found an article that could be useful. And now that we look at the full version, the way it appeared in the journal itself, I can see the publisher. Routledge is a well-known academic publisher. And I can see the professional affiliation of the author. She is indeed a scholar associated with the college. We see her credentials there. And so that is, I think, definitely, this tells us this is scholarly, but you've got to read it to see if it's actually useful for you. So as we develop criteria for choosing articles to use in our projects, it's not enough, of course, to say, oh, it's credible. This person is well known. They've published in a good journal. That doesn't mean it's actually going to be useful for your paper. So we have to, kind of preview it and see if it fits our needs. Now, this looks, again, there's tons of research, clearly. But as I look at some of the subtitles, the subheadings, I kind of scan through, and do I think this might be useful to me? Obviously, I'm not going to spend too much time doing this on the video itself. It's not very exciting for you. But, my gut feeling is this isn't quite what I'm looking for. I can still save it for later, but I want to continue my search, right? Right now, I'm just gathering sources, and then I can sit down later and read them if I want to. So I only found, remember, 2 sources through my first search, so I've got to try again. So I'm going to go back to the database. My browser tab is sleeping function. So I'm going to go back to Academic Search Complete and ignore the tabs I'm opening up. And I've got check my scholarly box, and I'm going to try a different search here. So if we look at the drop down, you can determine what you want the database to, like where you want it to search. So if I want to make sure that my article has a certain word in its title, which means it is definitely focused on what I want, I can do that. If I have an author in mind, which is probably pretty rare, subject terms. That, as I learned in the previous article, there are particular subject terms associated with the article that maybe if I use those in my search, I will come up with more results, right? That might be useful to me. So I am going to do a combination here. I'm going to keep video games, and then I am going to go to this next box, and I'm going to keep the and there. That means it's looking for this, a source that is about video games and also uses this search term in it. So I will put in as my subject ethics. I'm going to click this and put subject term. Now we'll see what happens. Same words as I used before, but ordered differently. I told the database to do something different. And now I have 584 results. Obviously, I will not be looking through all of those, but right away, I've got some sources that look useful because I've customized my search. So here we have the effect of moral intuitions on decisions in video game play, the impact of chronic and temporary intuition accessibility. And then I can read the other subjects that it's associated with. So psychology, moral agency. So that might be worth checking out. If I go through how to dissolve the gamer's dilemma, for some reason that's mentioning some really scary topics that maybe occur in video games that are not what I'm looking for. So let's see what we've got here. Perspective taking and decision making in educational gameplay. That might be something I want to check out. So I'm going to open that up, and I'm just going to scroll through a little bit more. So what have we got here? Moral foundation theory and moral reasoning in video game play. That could be very good, because my research involves how do video games with storylines that allow players to make choices as their characters help us exercise our moral and ethical thinking. And, how might this, subconsciously or not, teach us some things about our ethics and maybe even make us become more empathetic and ethical people. So that's my idea, and I want to make sure I can find some sources to help me explore that. So I would go through some of these. Again, we're not going to do that. It'll be pretty boring for you to look at me doing that. But you can see by experimenting with my search terms, I've come up with a lot of different results here that are worth checking out. Now I could customize it even further now that I've learned some more things. So let's see. Maybe I even want to substitute ethics for moral. And what does it suggest? Moral development, morals and ethics. I could try ethical dilemma, ethical decision making. That might be useful. So the engine, the database, is meant to help you. So it can even suggest search terms to you, just like when you're using Google, it suggests what you should search for. So let's see what we got here. Now only 16, but that could actually be a good thing sometimes when you've really narrowed down your search. And if you're lucky, you've got just a few sources that are very specific and very useful to you. I could try a different database, and I encourage you to check those out, but I have other videos provided by the library to show you how to use some of those. You can certainly explore to your heart's content, and you can ask me for advice, But what I want to show you now is a resource that is not provided on the library website, but your student ID gives you access to, and that is Google Scholar. Now, anyone can use Google for free, but Google Scholar is a search engine specifically devoted to finding you scholarly articles about a topic. But, as I've said before, a lot of scholarly journals cost money. So you want to be logged in with your Santa Fe ID. Log into the library first and then visit Google Scholar so that you still get access to the journals that would normally cost you money. So we're going to take a look at that next, and I think some of you might find this tool comfortable and easy to use because you're already familiar with Google. So I want you to have as many options as possible that you can explore as you grow as a researcher. All right, so if I'm ready to visit Google Scholar, I simply type in scholar.google.com, and it's going to bring up a search engine that looks just like Google, but with the addition of Scholar. And so you can see that I am already logged in. It knows my affiliation with my library because I was working on Santa Fe's library databases page first. So this means that any journals or that Santa Fe subscribes to, I will be able to access. It may be that in my search results, some things will pop up that Santa Fe hasn't paid for, in which case I won't be able to access them. Now, in the process of using Google Scholar, if you come across a source that looks perfect, but you cannot access it, it's asking you for money, do not pay for it, of course, but also feel free to email me because I may be able to access it in other ways. So that's a possibility. But let's take a look here at how Google Scholar works and what we can find with it. So you can start out with just a general search here. And I am, I've learned some things from my database searches. I've learned some things about useful keywords. And maybe I've started thinking about, okay, how could I try out different search terms? Now, one of the genres of video games in which you might find yourself making ethical choices are role-playing games, RPGs. So maybe I want to figure out what comes up, what kind of articles are out there about role-playing games. So I'm going to type in, you can see I already practiced this earlier, so I wanted to make sure I wasn't going to show you, terrible sources. So we're just going to go ahead and click that. Video games, role-playing. All right, so when I take a look at this, I have a lot of results. So obviously I'm probably going to customize as I go, but as you know from using Google and other search engines, oftentimes the first couple pages of sources might be the ones most relevant to what you're searching for. So, we can experiment here. But I'm just going to scroll through and kind of peek at what we've got. Google Scholar will also bring up scholarly books. And often, if you've ever looked at Google Books, books.google.com, some full books are available, some parts of books or chapters from books are available. So that's a possibility you could look at too, but it's probably in your best interest to really just focus on articles. So as we take a look here, beyond self-selection in video gameplay, consequences of massively multiplayer online, that doesn't necessarily look like what I am interested in. Language learning, that doesn't fit with what I want because I did not use ethics, right? So in a topic like role-playing video games, there is lots of stuff to write about apparently. Millions of things to write about. So that is too general of a search term. I need to go back to my ethics. Maybe I can type in ethics after it. I can see what other kinds of things it suggests. So apparently there's tons of research in video games, and that might be a topic you're even interested in exploring. We had an article about video games in the summary response assignment. So I'm actually going to go back to my previous search I did on the database that only gave me 16 results. But let's see if Google Scholar does any better with the same search term I was using before. So video games and ethical decisions. Now what do we got? All right, so less results, still obviously way more than I'm going to read, but this is a more focused search. And hopefully what comes up on the first page or so is going to be focused on what I really want. Now this one, a book, I'm going to ignore that for now. Who has time to read a book? So I've got another one here, The Ethics of Video Games, Mayhem, Death, and the Training of the Next Generation. I don't know if death and violence is really what I'm looking at. Certainly that involves ethics and morals, but I'm just going to pass over it because you know what you're interested in. You can check out things out of curiosity, and then you might surprise yourself and say, oh, that's the direction I want to go into now. But that's up to you. So I'm going to ignore that source, and I'm going to check out Ethically Notable Video Games, Moral Dilemmas and Gameplay. That title sounds very promising for the kind of sources I'm looking for. Critical ethical reasoning and role play. That looks like a good one too. I'm not going to click all of the things, but as we go through, here's a particular video game which I've actually played, Papers, Please, which deals with immigration. There's all kinds of stuff happening in video games right now that people are interested in writing about. Morality play, creating ethics in video games. That might be interesting. And so I've got some stuff to look at here. So let's examine one of my potential sources. Actually, we're going to check that one out too. Why not? All right. So ethically notable video games, moral dilemmas, and gameplay. So it's got an abstract that seems promising. The author is associated with a university and works in the College of Computing and Digital Media. So they have certainly some expertise to bring to the table. I might also expect an author who is associated with psychology or philosophy or someone who studies ethics. So, let's see what else we can find. I'm definitely seeing lots of sources being cited. One good way of previewing an article is if it does have subheadings, see if they are pinging, your interests. So games as ethical frameworks, that sounds promising to me. And then here it goes into specific games. Here's an old school one I played when I was much younger. So actual case studies of different video games, lots of quotations. So I'm quite intrigued by this. And it's only 9 pages. So remember that rule about an academic article can't be under 10. There are exceptions. And this one looks quite good to me, actually. And I can see that they have done a ton of research. They're citing their sources here. So that's one that I'm probably going to download and read later. All right, so that was a positive Google Scholar find. Now let's take a look at one of the other sources I opened up in another tab. So here we have Morality Play, Creating Ethics in Video Games. Now when I look at this, it looks like a Word document, and it looks a lot like a student paper. So I have to ask myself, even though Google Scholar pointed me towards this, is this a scholarly source? Is this an appropriate source? So I don't see any kind of academic affiliation. I don't see it associated with a journal of any kind. I don't see an abstract. No, it looks interesting, but I'm definitely not getting a journal vibe from it. Does it cite any sources? It's quite long. That's not always a sign of scholarly stuff. You can write long things. But does that ever work cited? Maybe I even take a look at some of those sources that might be useful to me. But to get to the bottom of where this is coming from, I could search for this person's name, but actually I see that this is hosted on his personal website. So I am just going to go to adamjthompson.com and see what I can find out. So sometimes you got to do a little bit of legwork. So I see that Thompson is a designer. Cool. I can check out some of his social media, maybe find out more about who he is, if he's qualified to be writing this. But I see here a handy link about video game research he's conducted. So some of his writing, I'm looking at, okay, the article that I had opened up came out in 2003. Now, I see no association with a journal, so it is not an article. It is likely a paper, perhaps one that was written for a class. Doesn't mean it's not a good paper. It could be brilliant, but it would not count as a scholarly source. I'm especially thinking this because I can see that this is his master's thesis. So the graduate student published that in 2007. So this was actually likely a paper he wrote as an undergrad. So it might be interesting for me to read, but it is not a source I can cite. Now that he has established himself, he's graduated, presumably has his master's. So he is someone who's probably done work since then that might be of interest to us. But that article I found, even though I found it through Google Scholar, was not scholarly. So you do need to know how to spot a scholarly source. Now, almost always, if you're searching through something on the library database and you check the right boxes, you will be filtered. Library filtering is going to give you a scholarly source, and you don't have to worry about it. If you're using something like Google Scholar, you can see it gave me some really cool specialized results when I searched that look promising for my project. But some things slipped through the cracks and a non-scholarly source showed up. So that's something you want to be aware of. Always vet your sources, go through the list of criteria for a scholarly source and make sure that it all adds up. And if you're unsure, you can email me, say, hey, I found this source. Is it scholarly? Do you think it's a good one? And I can take a look at it for you. But I want to make sure that you have these skills. And this video got a little bit longer than I intended to go over it, but I hope that it was useful to you because the scholarly source research process is one that can be quite experimental. It can take some time, and I want to make sure that you have the tools available to you to conduct good quality research that is going to help you write your papers.